It's 1998 and you have some money in your pocket and you're going to the movies. What movie do you see? Well, not Soldier because no one saw that.
In the future, technology will allow us to explore new worlds and change the way we live like never before. But there is one thing that will never change: who we are.
Soldier is a 1998 science fiction action film directed by Paul W.S. and written by David Webb Peoples, the Oscar-nominated screenwriter behind Blade Runner, Unforgiven, and 12 Monkeys. The film stars Kurt Russell as Sergeant Todd 3465, a soldier conditioned from birth into an emotionless killing machine, who is discarded by his superiors and finds an unlikely home among the colony of stranded settlers on the garbage planet Arcadia 234. Long before it reached the screen, Soldier had one of the more unusual development histories of any major studio film of the 1990s. According to David Webb Peoples himself, in our interview conducted by Danny Stewart's 2023 book Soldier from Script to Screen, the screenplay was written quickly on his own initiative in 1984. Peoples had said the project was sparked directly by seeing the original Terminator in theaters. He was struck by the idea of a tough and seemingly unsympathetic lead character, something he felt that the film had nearly achieved. Apparently, an emotionless killing machine still had some sympathy while blasting away every Sarah Connor.
Sarah Connor?
Yes.
Yeah. The script was originally titled The Base. Early reporting on the project ties it to a team behind First Blood, with Sylvester Stallone attached to star and Ted Kofcheff, First Blood's director, was set to, direct. At another point, Clint Eastwood became involved as something of a passion project. By several accounts, he loved the script, which we can assume was because it was overly cowboyish in tones, but it was enough for him to consider directing it himself. When Eastwood moved on, though, sometime between the years of 84 and 96, the screenplay sat on the shelf for roughly 15 years before Paul W.S. Anderson, fresh off Mortal Kombat, signed on to do the project. Of course, it was also delayed, and he went on to do Event Horizon before returning to do this. Before Kurt Russell came aboard, the lead role of Todd was reportedly passed through several other names. Per TV tropes and the making of an interview with associate producer Fred Fontana on the Arrow 4K release, which just came out this year, Keanu Reeves was originally cast before dropping out. And this would have been post-Speed Keanu, so, he decided to turn this role down so he could go do things like Johnny Mnemonic. Fontana's interview, though, does go into the deeper history of how they eventually landed on Kurt Russell. Once Russell signed on, reportedly for somewhere between 15 and 20 million, either a quarter or a third of the total budget depending on the source, and a substantial sum for an actor in his, let's say, latter half of his career. He made an unusual commitment to the role, though, and the physical demands it required. According to Anderson, Russell worked out 3 to 4 hours a day for roughly 18 months to build the dense, pumped-up physique he displays on screen, and refused to take PEDs. He felt the transformation was essential to selling Todd as a lifelong soldier, and the production was delayed to accommodate it. Anderson, like I said earlier, used this gap to direct Event Horizon, while Russell took no other film roles during this period. Principal photography ran from January to May of 1998, based primarily on the Warner Brothers studio in Burbank. By Anderson's own account, the film was originally envisioned as something closer to a Western relocated to space, closer in spirit to Shane than to a conventional action blockbuster, which had been one of Peoples' intentions when writing it, to the point that the movie is basically a Shane clone. The two major disruptions that reshaped the shoot, though, the first was weather. An especially severe El Nino storm system across Southern California in early 1998 made the production scouted exterior locations unusable. forcing the crew to shift much of its planned location work onto sound stages around Los Angeles, which eventually worked out terrific for him. The second disruption was Kurt Russell's body. During the first week of shooting, after 18 months spent waiting for him to get into shape, Russell broke his left ankle. 4 days later, he broke the top of his right foot as well. And the production had to be restructured around his injuries. According to the film's commentary track, the studio's official explanation at the time was Russell had been injured during a stunt. The real cause was reportedly far more mundane. He supposedly tripped over an ornamental cabbage during a break in filming. To work around the injuries, the shoot was reorganized by physical demand. Scenes of Russell lying down were filmed first, followed by scenes of him sitting and then standing still, and finally the more demanding action sequences came last. The very last scene shot was the early chain fight and running confrontation between Todd and Kane. Much of Soldier's visual comes down to production designer David L. Snyder. In his Arrow Video interview, Designing for the Future, Snyder traces his career from training as an architect to moving into art direction in the 1970s, working on Blade Runner and later contributing to films including Demolition Man and Super Mario Bros. He has said that his Blade Runner work effectively typecast him for dystopian production design. A reputation by his own account led directly to his being brought onto Soldier. The garbage planet Arcadia 234 became a canvas for visual Easter eggs drawn from across the production's connected universe of films. Visual wreckage on the planet includes the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, the F-117X Remora from Executive Decision, and the piece of Lewis and Clark from Anderson's own Event Horizon, which just came out the year before, a nod that ties Soldier into Anderson's broader filmography. It also includes a spinner from Blade Runner, which brings us to the film's biggest and strangest piece of trivia. Soldier is dense with self-referential jokes and nods to other films, and the deepest vein of all of them runs straight to Blade Runner, also written by Peoples. Beyond the spinner in the junkyard, Todd's service record references battles at the Shoulder of Orion and the Tannhauser Gate, both locations name-checked in Roy Beatty's famous dying monologue.
Attack ships on fire off the Shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time.
There are words on his shoulder. Tannhauser Gate. Argentine Sector. Shanghai 2012.
The record also cites the Argentine moons, a location that had previously appeared in Marvel's Blade Runner comic book adaptation. Anderson himself described Soldier as a sidequel to Blade Runner, and production designer David L. Snyder went further, characterizing the film in Cinescape interview as effectively an extension of or a sibling to Blade Runner's world. The picture, though, is more complicated than a simple shared universe pitch. In a 2020-24 interview tied to Stewart's book, Peoples flatly stated that he never set out to connect the two films and had no such thoughts when writing Soldier in 1984. The connective tissue was something Anderson's production added afterwards. Peoples also revealed that he has never actually watched the finished film. The script meant a great deal to him personally, and he feared that watching it might be painful. The rest of the in-jokes are a little less existential. Todd's on-screen ID number is 3465, which references Anderson's birth date of March 4th, 1965. His display service record includes strings of joke decorations that double as nods to Russell's earlier roles: a Pliskin Medal, a McCready Cross, a Cash Medal of Honor, an O'Neill Ring Award, a Captain Ron Trophy, a Dexter Riley Award, and a McCaffrey Fire Award. The record also lists citations for the Nebian Moons campaign, the Atreides Maelstrom War, and the War of Perdition's Flames. All of those sound mighty impressive until you realize they're all locations drawn from Star Trek Wrath of Khan.
He tasks me. He tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round Perdition's flames before I give him up.
Todd's weapons training record name checks the USCM Smart Gun and the M41A Pulse rifle from Aliens, and from Doom's MKIV BFG, and Elysium's PU-36ESM, the explosive space modulator that Marvin the Martian is perpetually trying to use on Duck Dodgers. When Soldier finally hit theaters in October 23rd, 1998, it walked straight into a release window that was absolutely the wrong environment for a mid-budget R-rated action film trying to court the 18 to 40 male demographic. Because of Kurt Russell's injury delay and the production's already long training period, the film missed earlier, less competitive window landing in late October, a slot that became overcrowded thanks to, in part, to the schedule shuffling and the tail end of the El Nino-related production disruptions. A real factor for several 1998 releases, though not always officially documented. The problem wasn't just competition, it was the type of competition. What you want when you open a movie like Soldier is a top 5 with films in their 3rd or 4th week, already cooling off and heading out the door. Instead, Soldier opened up against a cluster of fresh releases or still hot titles in their 1st or 2nd week. You had Pleasantville, Practical Magic, Bride of Chucky, Beloved, Ant Pupil, and Ants was in its 4th week. All of these were still in the high interest phase, and several had strong marketing pushes behind them. According to Box Office Mojo of this time period in 1998, Soldier opened 14th for the month with a $8.39 million in its 1st week, which allowed it to finish 5th. An even more telling sign that things weren't going right for Soldier was that it should have easily outperformed another movie that was in the same audience but was in its actual 6th week, which was Rush Hour. And Rush Hour at that time pulled in $3.79 million that same weekend. Soldier beat it, but only barely, and not in a way that signified staying power. For context, Rush Hour's 1st week had been a monster opening to over $42 million, which dwarfs Soldier's $8 million debut. That comparison alone told Warner Brothers they were in trouble. By the end of the opening weekend, Soldier had placed 5th, like I said, behind Bride of Chucky, Ants, Practical Magic, and Pleasantville. Only one of those movies actually has a war scene, and that's an animated one. And then the bottom fell out. By the 2nd weekend, Soldier dropped 56%, making only $2.82 million, following to 7th place and losing momentum so fast that it effectively vanished from the charts afterwards. And its total by day 10 was 11.2, and it never recovered. The film didn't need to make $40 million to justify a 2nd week, but practically speaking, it needed a much stronger opening to survive the competition and to make back its $60 million production. And what it made back didn't even cover Kurt Russell's reported salary. And even if it had held on, the knockout punch was coming. Adam Sandler's The Waterboy was opening 2 weeks later for the Thanksgiving holiday, and it would have absolutely eaten Soldier's audience. Quick mention, did Ain't It Cool News have an impact on this movie? Maybe. Probably not. At the time, AICN was a fairly popular news site that had talked about games and movies. The number of people who had computers in their homes or went to the local library to use the computers was relatively small, about 30%, and the number of them using it to read news of AICN was even smaller. But AICN had a habit in the 90s and all the way up until about the early 2000s, as well of reporting a movie's eventual failure before it actually failed. So some people were treating their reviews like they were oracles, predicting the future. But once again, this wasn't carried to the four winds by, bigger media outlets. There was no Access Hollywood or Hollywood Reporter talking about the failures of Soldier because ACNI said it would fail. It was just that when the embargo on reviews was lifted and the critics opened their mouths, they ripped the movie to shreds. And people heard that by word of mouth, didn't go watch the movie, and ACNI was proven to be true again. But the majority of people who went to see the movie gave the movie a B+, which honestly doesn't mean a lot anymore. Nowadays, to get an audience to give a movie less than an A means that they believe that they wasted their time watching your movie. And most people don't want to admit that they wasted their time. So, did ACNI have any impact on the movie? Probably not. But did they solidify themselves as predictors of failures? And that's The Making of Soldier, a movie that somehow predicted Halo. I mean, that intro alone is almost beat for beat, and copied almost every Western ever made, and it still managed to be aggressively fine. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just a cinematic shrug. The most interesting thing about this movie is everything happening around the movie, not inside it. The box office failure, when they should have had no competition, the longer and longer production of trying to get it made, the broken ankle and then the foot, forcing the movie further into competition with other films. I mean, it's just all crazy. But the other crazy thing is that if the film actually came out in 1997 because Kurt Russell decided to take PEDs, we may have never gotten Event Horizon. If Kurt Russell never broke his ankle or foot, would the movie have actually done better? Honestly, probably not. It would have probably came out a month or two, maybe even 3 before it officially came out, which could have put it squarely against films like Saving Private Ryan. But that's all speculative. But from what we've talked about, the failure of the box office, the early review bomb by ICN, those affected but not greatly, as it is ultimately a bland story. Which sucks to say, but it's predictable, silly at times, especially with the bright green snakes on an orange world. But the movie definitely has a strong start, just a very weak middle and finish. But outside of that, you guys have a good one. Bye.